secrets, deceit, and a courtroom fight no one saw coming. For over a decade, fans of Sister Wives watched every week as what appeared to be the complicated, yet intriguing, life of Kody Brown and his polygamous family unfolded before their eyes. To the world, Kody was the father of a polygamous family, one man juggling 4 wives, attempting to raise more than a dozen children, and posing as a man of faith, family, and devotion. It was complicated, sure, but it was always couched as the plight of a husband doing his best to hold together his non-traditional family. Viewers disagreed over whether he was equitable, whether the wives were contented, and whether the plural marriage dream could ever possibly succeed. But beyond the staged, edited version of reality television, another narrative was playing out, a narrative unknown to everyone outside the family, one that would not come to light until court records, legal petitions, and surprising personal journals emerged. What they uncovered was not only drama in the house, but a scandal so profound that it drew the Brown family into the harsh, unforgiving world of the court system. The fights were no longer about love anymore. They were now about money, property, betrayal, and the destruction of trust. For years, viewers had watched Kody on television discussing unity, discussing the creation of a dream community in which his wives and children would each have their own house on a piece of land that they shared. That land was Coyote Pass, a large tract in Arizona that represented the future of the family. To its viewers, it was meant to be where everyone converged, where damaged relationships were mended, and where the Brown heritage would be worth generations. But based on court documents and appalling revelations, Coyote Pass turned into something entirely different. It became a time bomb waiting to explode. Rather than harmony, it fostered distrust. Rather than equality, it revealed favoritism. And rather than trust, it ripped open old wounds that festered for years. And it wasn't only about the land. Buried in the court documents were whispers of unfulfilled promises, money deals that were never kept, signatures that mattered more than people knew, and hidden rulings that left some family members helpless. Those times, Kody Brown was no longer a husband. He was a man wielding resources, a man with authority over who had what, and eventually a man accused of playing the people around him. But most astonishing of all did not come from the lawyers or the judges. It came from someone nobody anticipated. The nanny. She had been inside the house, tending to the children, observing the everyday routines that cameras could not record. And she recorded them. Page by page, she documented what she witnessed, what she heard, and what she suspected. When those diary entries came out, they didn't merely fill in the blanks, they created a whole different picture of Kody and the family that he professed to lead. The nanny documented hushed late-night conversations, money disagreements swept under the rug, and admissions from Kody himself that showed he never had the intention of treating all his wives on an equal footing. Picture yourself as a fan who watched this family for years, cheering them on to be happy, only to find out that behind the scenes one man was supposedly manipulating things to look out for his own best interests. Picture yourself as one of the wives who signed contracts thinking in a dream, only to find out later that the dream never existed. That's what was revealed by the court. That's what the diary proved. This is no longer a family tale. It's a scandal, one that rocked the very foundations of the Brown family. The courtroom was where the truth could no longer be concealed, where personal battles became common record, and where the world finally caught a glimpse of the sadder truth behind the TV grins. Audience members who previously argued over whether Kody was fair or unfair now had to confront an even larger question: was the whole show based on deception? The fact is, when court documents are submitted, they do not concern themselves with appearances. They do not concern themselves with editing or spin. They reveal numbers, dates, signatures, and testimonies. And those records showed a man with accusations of playing favorites, directing benefits to one wife while sending others into the cold. They showed fights that weren't about property so much as about loyalty, about betrayal, and about what being a husband in a family as dysfunctional as the Browns truly is. And the diary of the nanny? That was the surprise no one saw coming. It spoke for all the wives who were whispering all these years but afraid to speak aloud. It provided readers with the uncensored, unadulterated account of what life within the Brown household was actually like when the cameras weren't there anymore. Her words didn't merely hint at favoritism, but documented it. They didn't merely point to secrecy but laid it bare. And with those journal pages, the facade of Kody Brown as the beleaguered but well-intentioned patriarch crumbled. As the case progressed, what was revealed was that this wasn't a family bickering over assets. It was a family bickering about truth. It was wives discovering the man they had put their lives and futures in his hands might have been working for himself the whole time. It was kids in the middle of parents who could no longer agree on what was right. And it was Kody in a courtroom, not only to face the judgment of the legal system, but the judgment of his own family and millions of viewers who thought they had gotten to know him. The Brown Empire, previously peddled as a tale of faith and togetherness, was now revealed as something far more sinister. The courtroom drama, the land claims, and the nanny's surprising diary pages were all evidence that what the world was watching on television was only the tip of the iceberg. Below it was betrayal, deception, and a scandal so enormous it could never again be concealed behind reality TV editing. And so the tale commences, not with unity, not with love, but with the astounding revelation that the Brown family was never what appeared on the surface. It starts with court papers, diary notes, and the icy reality that even the most apparently robust families fall apart when secrets are revealed. This is not simply another installment of Sister Wives. This is the tale of how the courtroom revealed the cracks in a family empire and left Kody Brown's legacy in tatters. It began with land. Not any land, but a large piece of land in Flagstaff, Arizona, that was to become known as Coyote Pass. When Kody Brown first presented this vision to his family, and then to millions of TV viewers on Sister Wives, he called it the ultimate plan. A compound where every wife would have her own home, where their children could raise each other side by side, and where their legacy could finally sprout. After all the years of traveling from state to state, evading critics, and attempting to make an alternative family work in a traditional world, Coyote Pass was meant to be the solution. But quickly dreams turn into nightmares. And for the Browns, this ground became the exact opposite of what revealed all the cracks in their family life. What began as the thrilling prospect for the future gradually morphed into nasty fights, shattered trust, and ultimately a courtroom fight that no fan had ever dreamed of. The purchase itself was not straightforward. The Browns did not purchase Coyote Pass as a single cohesive unit. Instead, the property was parceled up, and the names of each wife were differently shown on documents. There were shared plots, individual plots, and Kody's name was interwoven in a way that gave him more authority than it initially seemed. Back then, fans didn't notice. Court documents on large purchases often get messy, but within the family, they were time bombs waiting to go off. As months passed into years, concerns began to arise. Who actually paid what? Who was supposed to get the bigger lots? Why were some wives feeling excluded from decisions, while others were seemingly privy to more information? And why consistently did Robyn, the youngest and newest wife of the group, seem to end up with the best deal? In private, the debates became more acrimonious. Janelle, with her level head, was the first to start questioning fairness. Christine, perpetually feeling like she was on the outside looking in, became more and more infuriated with broken promises that never became a reality. Mary, emotionally removed from Kody for a long time, had her name still attached to assets that kept her stuck in a way she could not get out of. And then there was Robyn, whose devotion to Kody made her both his best friend and the biggest source of resentment among the other wives. Coyote Pass was no longer a dream, but a war zone. And the fissures in the family's togetherness widened so much that even the cameras from TLC couldn't conceal them anymore. Audiences saw scenes of heated debates over kitchen tables, with Kody hotly disputing timelines, building permits, and money contributions. He portrayed himself as a man weighed down by responsibility, attempting to balance the needs of everyone with keeping some dream of unity alive. But court documents subsequently uncovered that under that rhetoric, the truth was considerably more brutal. The property wasn't being shared equally. The monetary arrangements weren't equal. And certain wives were promised things in writing that never really belonged to them. What made it worse was that Kody linked the fate of their relationships to the property itself. He used to tell his wives that if they did not commit to Coyote Pass, they were not committed to the family. It was no longer a piece of property. It was a loyalty test. And for wives who already spent years sacrificing, in following moves from state to state, and fighting to establish independence, that test was a trap. The pressure became intolerable. Christine, already at a breaking point, finally came to the realization that she couldn't exist under Kody's land plan future. She saw right through the assurances, and knew that regardless of what was being said, Robin's voice had more power, and her children's future was being given precedence over everyone else's. Janelle, who had put money and effort into the land, acknowledged that she no longer trusted Kody as a leader. Even Mary, who had for years held on to hopes of reconciliation, came to understand that her status in the land and in the family was symbolic at best. And thus the land that was meant to bring them together started to drive them apart. When disputes about property couldn't be resolved in the house, they spilled onto the courthouse floor. What had been hushed talks around kitchen tables were transformed overnight into legal briefs. Lawyers examined deeds, mortgages, and contracts. Judges heard testimony regarding who brought what, and for the first time, the Brown family's dirty laundry wasn't merely reality TV spectacle. It was courtroom evidence. The courtroom revealed just what the wives had always suspected, that the land was never going to be equal. Records showed that Kody maintained power in ways that ensured he stayed in control, regardless of assurances he gave. The wives, some of whom had been loyal to his word for decades, were aghast at just how little security they really had. Fans who had fantasized with the Browns now watched in shock as the future of the family disintegrated. Viewers who believed Coyote Pass was the fairy tale ending saw it as the start of the demise. The symbolism was inescapable. The land, previously called holy ground, was now cursed, tainted by deceit, and scarred by betrayal. What stung the most was not merely the money or the property boundaries. It was knowing that Coyote Pass stood for loyalty and love, and for most of the wives, those no longer existed. The land served as a mirror, revealing to them the truth they did not wish to confront, that Kody's dream was never about oneness, but about domination. The wives weren't merely losing hope in the Coyote Pass dream, they were losing hope in the man who had brought them there. And once lost, there was no land, no property, no dollars and cents that could keep the family intact. The dream had turned to dust. The land had shattered them, and the courtroom was the only sphere now where the truth could be finally articulated loud. A courtroom is where secrets could no longer be concealed, where every word is heard, every allegation is scrutinized, and every truth will come to the surface sooner or later. For the Browns, entering that environment was entering a world they no longer could manipulate or edit. The cameras of TLC might capture tension and conflict at home, but the courtroom stripped bare performance. There were no retakes there. No confessionals, no pick-and-choose narratives. There were only documents, attorneys, and the stark gravity of the law. When the conflicts over Coyote Pass and the family's complicated finances spilled into the courtroom, the Browns could no longer hide their problems. Fans who once viewed Kody as a man with too much on his plate now found themselves viewing him in a very different light, not just as a husband and father, but as a man who was at the center of a messy and public court fight. And the portrait that the evidence painted was not a flattering one. In court, the issues weren't love and togetherness. They were numbers, actions, signatures, and promises broken. Both wives had their opinion, their story, and their grievances list. Christine claimed she was kept dangling with promises of a secure future, when in fact, Kody was favoring Robin. Practical as always, Janelle was concerned about the money she herself had put in, money she wished to be treated fairly. Emotionally disconnected from Kody, Mary still had her name attached to property and assets that made it difficult for her to move on. And then there was Robin, appearing with Kody in the courtroom as she did at home, maintaining that whatever decisions were reached had been in the family's best interest. But the documents presented a different picture. Court documents showed that Kody had put himself at the center of virtually every deal. His name was listed in ways that made him a master, whereas the wives' names were fragmented and dispersed over chunks of property and loans. To the amateur eye, it could have looked like a coincidence on paper. But to judges and attorneys, it revealed something else. A man who was deliberately arranging ownership so he could still control, regardless of how divided the family became. The most jarring moments were when attorneys started reading aloud letters, emails, texts, and contracts that were once confidential. These weren't the scripted conversations fans watched on television. These were unedited, real-life exchanges, where frustration spilled over and manipulation could easily be recognized. At one time, a text from Kody was disclosed in which he alluded to the fact that if the wives were not embracing his vision for the property, then they were not really loyal to him. In another, so-called financial obligations that had been promised were disclosed as imprecise at best, deceptive at worst. To hear the words of affirmation in court was like validation of everything Christine had dreaded. She had always been suspicious that Kody was playing favorites with Robyn, but now the documents made it irrefutable. To Janelle, the documents certified that her trust had been betrayed. She had put everything into the vision of Coyote Pass, only to see that her efforts had been consumed in a plan that did not safeguard her. And for Mary, the court's disclosures compelled her to face the reality that she had been bound by the law to an institution that provided her no actual protection. What was so compelling about the courtroom scenes was the manner in which they stripped away Kody's defenses. On television, he could deflect, shout, or posture as the misunderstood patriarch. But under the gaze of a judge, those strategies were useless. When presented with direct questions, he had to provide direct answers. And when paperwork conflicted with his testimony, the paper spoke louder than his rationalization ever could. The air was charged. Witnesses reported silence so thick you could hear the weight of years of anger suspended there. The wives sat with their attorneys, each advocating for her own interests, no longer united front-facing Kody that he once insisted upon. The man who professed to preside over one big family was now faced with the irrefutable fact: the family did not trust him enough to stand united. As the hearings continued, further shocking information was revealed. Loans that had been borrowed in some wives' names had been spent in ways they were not entirely aware. Vows of equitable sharing of land were found to be non-enforceable without further agreements that had never been executed. And financial actions that appeared to be family choices on television were found to be one-sided choices by Kody in secret. The judge heard, the attorneys pushed, and brick by brick, the meticulously built facade of the Brown family business crumbled. What viewers had seen as a offbeat, struggling but cohesive family on TLC now was found to be a dysfunctional group held together by only documents and the dominion of one person. But maybe the most bruising aspect of the courtroom theatrics wasn't the legal papers or the money bombshells. It was the emotional cost. Christine cried through the proof that she had never ever been a partner on an even playing field. Janelle seethed with anger when she understood her years of effort and sacrifice for money had been manipulated. Mary said nothing, her reserved attitude concealing years of pain, and all the while Robyn held on to Kody's side, her devotion only fueling the other's resentment. The courtroom didn't just reveal deceptions, it made all of them face the truth of what their family had become. And while the legal resolution centered on dividing things and establishing ownership, the actual outcome was far larger. Trust was broken, bonds were severed, and the pretense of togetherness was shattered for good. For Kody, the courtroom was a stage upon which his power could no longer prevail. For the wives, it was the ground where their voices were heard for the first time in ways they never were in their own homes. And for viewers, it was the moment that the curtain was opened, and it was revealed that the narrative they had been viewing for more than a decade was much more complicated, much more painful, and much more scandalous than anyone could have ever envisioned. When the gavel finally fell, the court rulings were unambiguous, but the emotional wounds were indelible. The courtroom had settled more than controversies. It had revealed the truth, and in doing so, it reduced the Brown family to ashes, their reputation forever tainted by the icy, unforgiving glare of justice. Sometimes the most devastating bombshells don't come from the subjects of the narrative. They arrive from the people who waited in the shadows, observing, listening, and taking it all down. And in the Brown family's case, that surprise gift was a diary. Not penned by a wife, not by a child, nor even by Kody himself, but by the nanny who had lived within their sphere. Watching the children, seeing the dynamics play out, and taking note of things no one else had the courage to voice. The nanny's diary was never intended for the outside world to read. It was a private journal, an attempt to make sense of the weird and crazy life she had entered. But when the court battle over Coyote Pass and the family's money picked up steam, those pages just became evidence. And what they showed was more surprising than anything that had been written on TV or in court papers. It started with small things at first. Comments on the rhythms of the daily life in the household. She documented how meals were eaten, where people sat, where they didn't sit together. She noted the silences between Kody and some of the wives, how conversations would die when he entered the room, and how Robin somehow always had his ear when no one else did. These were the sort of things that were innocent enough on their own, but if read in context, gave a sense of a family that was already fractured, well before the public witnessed it coming apart. After that, the entries became weightier. The nanny discussed money talks she had heard when caring for the children in the other room. She remembered times when Kody would speak in a softer tone with Robin, promising to provide for the future of her kids, while the others were excluded from the conversation. She remembered how forms would show up in the middle of the night, with Kody and Robin being the only ones who read them, and how the other wives learned about decisions only after they'd already been made. One of the entries, written months prior to the announcement that Christine was leaving, spoke of a fiery confrontation between Kody and Janelle. The nanny's diary read that Kody had accused Janelle of not being fully committed to the family because she did not see the equity of the land split. Janelle replied by asking why Robin's lot was bigger and more valuable. The nanny said Kody stormed out, grumbling he didn't owe explanations to anyone who was not loyal. That phrase, "didn't owe explanations," would be a repeating testament brought up in court, demonstrating how much Kody linked control with loyalty. The most heart-wrenching entries, however, were the ones in which the nanny documented Kody's private statements. More than once, she penned that Kody acknowledged in frustration that he never actually intended to split the land in half. He allegedly told her that Robin was his real future and that the others would fall away. To see those words in her own handwriting was to see the facade of equality disintegrate. Years ago, Kody had assured his wives that everyone was loved, that the property was shared, that they were a family. But from what can be gathered from the diary of the nanny, even Kody did not think so. He was playing a chess game and only one wife was ever going to win. The court gasped when the diary passages were read into the record. They weren't hearsay or rumor. They were accurate, coherent accounts from someone who didn't have a motive to lie. The nanny wasn't seeking her 15 minutes of fame. She had never gone public before. Her diary was real because it was never meant as a weapon, and that made it that much more compelling when those words were added to the evidence in the case. For Christine, the diary was painful confirmation. Everything she had known, everything she had attempted to say but was shot down as jealousy or insecurity, was there in ink. The favoritism, the secrecy, the dishonesty, it was all recorded. For Janelle, it was infuriating evidence that her sacrifices had been ignored, that her loyalty had been taken advantage of. And for Mary, the diary reaffirmed something she had long known in secret. She no longer figured into the equation, only a signature on a page bound to a man who had emotionally moved on years earlier. Robin's response was the most nuanced. On the one hand, the diary portrayed her as the favored wife, the one Kody confided in, the one whose children were his priority. On the other hand, it stuck her in the middle of the resentment. The reason the other wives felt betrayed? For Robin, those pages were both a shield and a spotlight, shielding her position with Kody, but shining the cost of that position onto the entire family. Viewers who had been watching the show were shocked. The nanny's diary was the ultimate episode of behind-the-scenes reality, the kind of betrayal reality TV could only hope to catch. Those who previously argued about whether Kody was equitable now had the proof. The favoritism wasn't rumor. Now it was on paper. The manipulation wasn't allegation. It was evidence. And Coyote Pass's dream was not merely a failed scheme. It was a skillfully crafted delusion meant to maintain power in Kody's grasp. The diary also laid bare the cost of emotions of living in such a household. The nanny spoke of children overhearing quarrels, the tension between their mothers, and grappling with divided loyalties. She mentioned how certain children clung to their mothers for assurance, while others became withdrawn, feeling as if nothing in their world was secure. For fans, it was a reminder that amidst all the grown-up drama, there were young lives trapped in the debris of shattered promises. The more entries that were posted, the harder it was to ignore the diary. It wasn't the opinion of one individual, it was a timeline, a chronology of a family disintegrating from the inside out. The court accepted it as valid evidence. The wives accepted it as vindication. And Kody accepted it as betrayal. He claimed that the nanny had misinterpreted his words, that intimate moments had been being taken out of context. But the fact that she was consistent in keeping her records made it hard to argue against. And thus, the nanny's soft words rang louder than any defense Kody could make. They took away his power to spin things. They revealed the favoritism he had been pretending did not exist. And they provided the wives with the proof they needed to show that their fears were not paranoia, they were reality. Before the courtroom drama was over, the diary had turned everything around. It wasn't simply another piece of evidence. It was the smoking gun, the document that pulled back the curtain and showed people what life in the Brown family really was like when they weren't around. To the fans, the diary of the nanny was both heartbreaking and engrossing. It revealed to them that the family that they had emotionally invested in for years was never as it appeared. For the wives, it was the agonizing reality they lived but could never substantiate. And for Kody, it was the one thing he could never manage to keep under wraps. The penned words of a person who had witnessed it all and had the audacity to put it all into print. Ultimately, the diary of the nanny wasn't just a chronicle, it was the clincher. It was the point at which secrets were inescapable, where lies were revealed, and where the whole facade of oneness disintegrated. The diary didn't just narrate, the diary narrated the truth. And the truth would follow Kody Brown to his death. When the dust finally settled, the court fight might have decided the law. But it left a family in shambles. The land was parceled up. The papers signed, the gavel pounded, but the deeper destruction couldn't be quantified on a map of the property or measured in dollars. The damage was emotional, irreversible, and calamitous. Christine was the first to depart. For years she had been screaming for love, equality, even the slightest indication that her labor made a difference. The court case and the diary of the nanny illustrated what her heart had understood for years. The promises of Kody were empty. She left, not in bitterness, but determination. To Christine, departure was not failure. It was liberation. She got married again. She laughed once more. And she lived a life beyond Kody's dictatorship. For her, the consequences were bruising. But they were also freeing. Janelle's journey was more complex. Practical, dedicated, and committed to the family dream for years. She had invested her money, her time, and her faith in the dream of Coyote Pass. But ultimately, she had little to show for it, except frustration. Her contributions had been swallowed up in a plan that never gave her security. Janelle didn't scream or slam doors. She quietly detached, her disappointment showing in her eyes more than her words. The fallout for her was not just the loss of property. It was the shattering of faith in a man she had believed would keep his promises. Mary's story was perhaps the saddest of all. She had hung on the longest, hoping Kody would look at her the way he used to, hoping for an opportunity to show him that she still belonged. But the courtroom made it irrefutable. She was not in his future. She was a name on a deed, a technicality in the paperwork, but no longer a companion in his heart. The diary of the nanny confirmed what she had suspected. She had long ago been erased, leaving only Robin. For Mary, the blowback was a desolate sort of despair, the anguish of discovery that decades of devotion had gotten her nowhere. And then Robin. To some, she came out the winner, the only wife who held by Kody to the end. She was the survivor, the one he picked, the one with the children who were given priority. But at a price. She was isolated, resented, and blamed by many of the fans for the breakdown of the family. The fallout for Robin was sweet and sour. She got the husband she wanted, but lost the sisterhood that had once characterized her existence. Her vision of a large blended family became a nightmare in which she and Kody were isolated, with silence rather than love filling the gaps. And what of Kody, for the man who used to crow about having a family of powerful women and dozens of kids? The fallout left him vulnerable. He had one wife standing beside him, out of touch with most of his children, and the burden of a public image in tatters. To the fans, he was no longer the offbeat patriarch hanging in there. He was the fellow who allowed it all to crumble. The court had taken away his facade. The diary had attested to the favoritism, and the wives' exodus had established that his hold was broken. But the repercussions did not stay with the adults alone. The children also carried the wounds. They had grown up in the gaze of the cameras, nurtured on the illusion of oneness, to see it shatter in the eyes of the world. Some remained loyal to their mothers, disconnecting from their father. Others attempted to remain neutral, torn between loyalty and disappointment. The nanny's diary had shown how the tension had affected the children deeply, and now that their family was broken, they were forced to find pieces of a future that no longer was. Viewers were shocked. They had spent over a decade with this family, cheering for them through every step, every marriage, every childbirth. To watch it all fall apart in court filings and journal entries was too much to bear. The Browns had been sold previously as an inspiration of love, religion, and perseverance. But the backlash revealed something much more sinister: manipulation, favoritism, and an erosion of trust. And yet, though painful, the truth was a powerful thing. The wives who walked away were empowered by independence. Christine created a new marriage and a new life full of joy. Janelle found her own voice, planting her feet firmly in independence. Even Mary, devastated as she was, started to discover what her life would be like without seeking Kody's approval. The fallout tore down the myth of oneness, but in doing so, it liberated the women to tell their own stories. For Kody, the fallout was about confronting the one thing he had ever sought to escape: responsibility. No longer could he blame the wives for being disloyal enough. No longer could he obscure behind speeches regarding family oneness. The court had ruled, the diary had come clean, and the wives had left. All that was left behind was a man with one wife, a ruined reputation, and a tainted legacy sullied by the very ground he once considered his dream. The irony was near perfection. Coyote Pass, the land that was to unite everyone together, became the very cause that tore them asunder. It was meant to represent faith, unity, and family. Rather, it became a representation of betrayal, control, and destruction. The land was sold, the proceeds split, but the price was priceless. It cost them trust. It cost them love. It cost them the family they had told the world was indomitable. And so the tale is brought to an end, not with a harmonious family on a tract of land in Arizona, but with broken bonds, hollow vows, and a scandal that will forever be the Browns'. The courtroom had its say, but the true judgment came about in the hearts of the wives, the kids, and the fans who witnessed it all come to pass. The damage is irreparable. The family is dissolved, and the legacy of Kody Brown is not longer the tale of a man and 4 wives, but the tale of a man who lost them all.